Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, a show where we talk about all things shame, what it is, how it sneaks its way in, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Kira Wackett, and listeners, all I can say is we are in for such a treat with today's episode. We're joined today by the amazingly insightful Jackie Contessa, who's going to dive deep into one of the hottest forms of personality assessment, the Eneagram. Not only is she going to break down what the Eneagram is and how it can be a powerful support tool for understanding our true selves, but where and how shame shows up inside of it. From the shame of comparison or assumption about what a type or number means about you, and even the insight it can unlock to better understanding our fears, pain, and anger, shame has its hands all over the Enneagram. So how can we leverage the Enneagram in our favor to support shame resilience rather than shame-driven living? This is where Jackie comes in. Jackie, referred affectionately as the iron fist in a velvet glove, is passionate beyond belief about making sure that self-awareness is demystified once and for all. She's a life coach who specializes in personality typing and using the Enneagram to help you understand your innermost self. She's a dynamic, out-of-the-box thinker and champion for personalities who believes they're limitless. Her passion is simple: helping people craft their own narrative with the right language, tools, and insight to support their human experience and live their dream life as themselves. So let's get into this episode. Grab a seat, get comfortable, get your walking shoes on, whatever it is, and let's dive in. Welcome, Jackie. I'm so excited for this episode and this conversation.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. That was a great intro, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation very, very much.
Yeah, me too. I think, not to put the cart before the horse, but one of the things I'm really excited about personally is how the Enneagram was sort of like a silent overtaker of now sort of the general population's understanding of personality assessments and types. Mm-hmm. It kind of felt like astronomy or astrology, where it was like, I guess it's astrology, where people will come in like, oh, what's your sign? What's this? And then all of these things. And when I first moved out to the Pacific Northwest, everybody would ask me that. Like, I'm not used to that. Nobody talked about that in Wisconsin, or maybe few people did, but it was like, whoa, this is like a big thing in how people understand each other. And it felt like the Enneagram was that. And I was already so deep in my training and my master's program, things that I was doing. I was like, I've got these few tools and tests. This is like the 17th personality test. Maybe it's a phase. Where is it going? I never really got into it. It's not going anywhere. And whether or not it is the best tool, it is a tool that a lot of people really like and a lot of people don't truly understand. So I think it's going to be cool to kind of, you educate me a bit because I don't have as much experience as you do with it. And also to really help think about how this fits into the scheme of kind of all forms of personality assessment, support, exploration, all of those things. So when we get started, I love to, every episode, just kind of start in the same way. I would love to hear from you one word to describe how you're feeling right now. Anything like about this episode, about life, just one word to describe how you're feeling in this moment.
Oh my goodness. The first word that comes to mind is delusional.
It's a new one.
I swear. Because you know what? I was like, what's this question she's going to ask me? And in my head, I was like, she's going to ask me what gives you the right, like what gives you the right to talk about this?
Who are you? Right.
But what I was thinking to myself, it was like, if she asks me that question, I'm just going to give the answer. Like, what gives me the right? I'll tell you what gives me the right. And so I was like, maybe the answer to this is delusional, but that's truly how I feel right now. And the good kind, the kind that's, that tells me I can do whatever, whenever, not in a bad way, but in a way that's like, you got this, girlfriend, go ahead, go do what you want. You can take on and do anything. And that's kind of the season I've been sitting in the last 2-3 weeks. And I feel like I'm still there. So I'm feeling it currently.
Do you think that sort of priming too of because there's a certain projection of this person's going to ask this of me, which either means you've experienced this before with other people or you're just waiting to experience it with other people. So which side of the coin did that fall on, that you were sort of primed to play defense before we even got started?
So that's such a great question. Everything that we tend to automatically think, I categorize as like a muscle that, gets strengthened with use or atrophies without use. And so I've strengthened that muscle specifically by myself. Self-sabotage. But I very much have since actually going full-time coaching and using the Enneagram full-time, that question has been something I've been asking myself. And so that muscle is strong as shit right now. That's probably why.
Right. Because you're primed for it, because you're still having to, I don't know if it's prove to yourself or just get out of your own way that you have a right to stand here and be here. And I think a lot of that is also internalized bias around who is meant to say and do things. And for some things, I think it's really important. Like, I worked in the eating disorder field for a really long time. I'm still licensed as a therapist, still keep up with all that training. I would get really frustrated when people would take advice from someone that calls himself a nutritionist, because literally anybody on the planet can call themselves a nutritionist, and that's dangerous. And so when we're talking about somebody's health and well-being and eating disorder recovery and that work, and I'm saying we need to talk about the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist, or here's why we need to see a medical doctor to do certain labs and tests. There's a reason behind that. But when it comes to some of this work, there's some gray areas. There is definitely a needing to know what you're talking about, your limits ethically, also just intellectually, and what your skill set is, but recognizing that you do have a right to come to the table. And I think for many of us, it feels like, well, if I don't have XYZ training or letters after my name, or someone else hasn't opened the door, I'm not supposed to open the door, and I'm not allowed to sit at the table. So it sounds like you're working through that piece as you're making this transition.
Oh yeah, 100%. I was working in tech up until just a few months ago in tandem with coaching. So like, there are a lot of different questions, and I'd say even ways that we berate ourselves when, we get the opportunity to give something more than 60%. You know what I mean? Like, we get face to face with a different kind of mirror. It's a little bit more Windexed at this point. And so you're like, this is scary. So yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of working through that process. And a lot of that process is really just peeling back layers. Like, it's, it kind of reminds me of one of my friends. She's a literal ballerina in Russia, and like cannot go get pedicures because she's like, the strength's on the outside. Like, I can't go get a pedicure. They're going to ruin all of that. And I like, literally, that's like, I feel like I've been getting a ballerina pedicure for the last 3-4 weeks. That's where I feel. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and I think, we'll talk about this because I think anybody, however they would fall, whatever their type is, we've all got those stories. We've all got those kind of shame stories coming in. And it's really interesting to me because you're very self-aware. Obviously, that's something you've had to work really hard at, I'm assuming, because I think innately we aren't just, I guess we are really self-aware as babies. It's usually conditioned out of us as we get older and we're adults, and there's sort of conformity. And then you're reconditioning it back in. So you've done a lot with that. I'm curious how you got here. So how old were you? When did you figure out the Enneagram? When did any of this sort of curiosity for yourself come in? Because I'm assuming there's a portion that's personal for you. And then how did you make the decision of, this is where I am meant to be? Self-sabotaging thoughts and negative biases and all of this, all that's still with me. I still know that this is where I want to go.
This is it. Yeah, no, that's great. So I think one point that I'd love to like lead on first is that my specific personality type really tends to lack self-awareness. Emotional intelligence, yes, but lacks self-awareness for the life of them. Like, it is too scary to think about our own needs, wants, desires, feelings, all of that. So we will minimize and not project, but like kind of be like, oh, I don't have problems. You have problems. Let me help you. Like that's... Yeah. So it's very, very interesting. And I appreciate that compliment in saying that I am self-aware, because that's one of the other muscles that in my life had really, for about 20 years, atrophied without use. And yes, it is conditioned out of us. But essentially how I started looking into the Enneagram was I was part of a community many, many years ago and ended up working for a nonprofit related to that community. And that's when, community does a lot of there's a lot of pros and cons, more pros than cons, if you're in the right community, but lots of pros and cons to community. And I think one of the things that I started realizing was I don't know that I quite know how to operate here when I'm not just one-to-one with somebody. And I was like, well, why is that? And then I was like, well, if I'm one-to-one with them, I know how to answer to them. Like I know what they want. I know what they're looking for. So I know how to make them love me. And I was like, well, that's not it. So as I was working at this nonprofit, a lot of issues started coming up, a lot of personal issues with other people. And if you've ever worked at a nonprofit doing 6-7 roles for the price of one,
for like the half price of one, having also been in the nonprofit world.
If I'm being honest, and the amount of times I had the director threatened to, dock my pay on this in a staff meeting in public because we're a family, so on and so forth. But being in this family, hey, listen, if you're the black sheep in one family, you'll be the black sheep in all of them. So I was like, yeah, no, something is not right here. And I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's them. Like, I don't know what it is. And I burnt out working for them just because what I realized was I lacked the language, the idea, the wherewithal to be like, what's going on and what is needed? Like, what is actually happening and what is needed to fix this or to not feel this way anymore? And, burnt out, moved literally out of state. And I had a friend who was like, start looking into personality study. And I looked into everything. When I landed on the Enneagram and got to a place where I started hearing about things that I had even hidden from myself, about myself, number one, it filled in the gaps of like, oh, this is what I could have said when they were like, why aren't you XYZ type of person? Read a book about it and try to be this person. I could have said, actually, no, I'm this type of person, put me here, but I didn't have that. But also at the same time, I was like, wow, I've hidden every single one of these things from myself. How do they know? How do they know my why? And I felt like for many, many years, and I think a lot of people get into this, when they start wanting their life to unravel as adults or outside of after the, quote unquote college years, and I get this response from a lot of like my clients or people in consults, like they feel like they're running into a brick wall, like, or some people have said, like, I feel like I'm hurling myself into a wall, trying to figure out what is wrong with me, what's stopping me, am I crazy? Things like that. The different questions. Is there more? Is this it for me? And I realized that the Enneagram started answering those questions from a very, very direct route to where do you want to go approach. And, so it really became a tool that I used for myself because I was tired of people pleasing. I was tired of walking around empty. I was tired of not knowing who, what, and why I was. And when I decided that I wanted to coach, I was like, well, I should know people and they should know themselves. That's like the bare minimum. And everybody deserves that right to have some language that says, this is how and why I operate this way. And I use that as the basis of coaching. That's my long-winded story.
Well, and I think, so there's a couple of things that are really standing out to me as you're sharing this. So one, whether it's in a job setting, our family dynamics, a school setting, many of us have bumped up against you are problematic in some way. You are too introverted. You're playing too small. You are too loud. You're too dramatic. You're too, whatever it is.
You're both too much and not enough. Thank you.
Exactly. And so we've all experienced that in different ways for different aspects. And for many of us, there's the layer of our intersecting identities, cultural biases, norms, all of these things that really play a role in terms of these expectations, these handouts of a checklist of how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to show up in the world. So you had this experience, the same as a lot of other people. You're in a job and you're recognizing, oh, this isn't working. I don't feel good here. And I feel like I'm sort of always being reminded of that fear that I have about myself. I'm too much and not enough all at the same time. But you're still stuck in the trying to people please, because as we're going to unlock, that's kind of your part of who you are, and part of your shame coping style is to secure connection by taking care of everybody else, is my assumption.
Yeah.
And so as you're doing that, you're still reaching the end point, like a match that's getting to that last point, but you're trying and trying and trying. And then when you burnt out, it sounds like you were able to kind of see that maybe this wasn't all you. Maybe the problem is you, but maybe it's not. And that's a really interesting place to be, because a lot of us, like you said, people running into a brick wall, the assumption is I've got to fix this. Yeah,
Yep.
There's something wrong with me. I've got to bulldoze past this. Maybe if I run faster, maybe if I push harder, I will figure it out. And so there's a desperation there. And so somehow you were able to unlock a curiosity layer that allowed you to come at it from sort of a side angle, to explore, to be curious, to start to see these things. I'm wondering if you can pinpoint what allowed you to do that instead of continuing to put your head against the wall. Because that's not, I think, people's go-to response, particularly when they're burnt out in a place of shame.
I think the modality really has to speak your language. And so I like what you said at the beginning of this episode, where you were like, it's not the best one or the only one. For me, it spoke my language. And to give you like almost like a parallel example, Myers-Briggs, I have known, I'm an ENFJ since I was like 15. Okay. I've known that I'm an ENFJ. And what I've done with that is I am able to tell people that I am an ENFJ.
Right.
That is it.
Which, for listeners, the Myers-Briggs is like one of the highest touted, and even like in my master's program, even in my undergrad, like every student that goes to do any sort of coaching assessment, like that is one of the top 2 that people go to, is the Myers-Briggs. And then if you've done like 16 personalities or the other free assessments based on that, then you get told this 4-digit code, sometimes 5, depending on which one you do. And then it's basically supposed to communicate everything about you, and here's how you interact, and here's what's going on. And it sounds like for you, you've known it. It also didn't take you anywhere. It
didn't, because it's a tool for others, right? I think in that sense, it's a tool that I can, oh, hi, nice to meet you, ENFJ. And they're like, got it. Okay. So she's excitable and she's judgmental as fuck. Great. Awesome.
Right.
But with the Enneagram, there's a quote that I heard when I was working with survivors of trafficking, that I legitimately, I apply this to the study of the Enneagram and why it was different for me, why it's a game changer. Because you learn some things about yourself that speak your language so specifically that, here's the quote, you can choose to look the other way, but you can't say you didn't know. And the way we're wired as humans, and there are always exceptions to this, right? There are things like, having NPD. There are things that can debilitate us from wanting more, wanting to be self-aware, take that journey, right? So I can't say that for everybody as a blanket statement, but there is something about the Enneagram that spoke a language to me that I didn't think existed. Like, it took away this idea that like, you're the only one, and not in a bad way. Like it took away this idea, like, you're not the only one who thinks that they're this kind of crazy. You're not the only one who wonders, why does this keep happening to me? You're not the only one that wonders. It started answering the deep internal questions, like, is there more, without answering them directly. What it did was it showed me just, yes, there is, and allowed me and empowered me to do what I needed to do to get there. And that's honestly what I love about it, because it's, you start with where you are. You start to understand where you could be, and the Enneagram slowly acts like a bridge. But it's like one of those bridges in, like, I don't know, Jumanji or some shit, where like when you lift your foot to take a step, that's when the brick shows up for you to actually land on. You've got to like be a little bit bold in that way. But that's what did it for me, was it spoke my language. And I will say this, I did not at first relate to everything within my personality type. In fact, there were maybe 2 or 3 things that I was like, fuck me, this is terrible. This is the worst one out of all the types, isn't it? But I worked on those things. And even just recently, as I'm redoing my typing sessions, like I'll do that every so often with new information, and I'm rereading some of my, my old stuff. I'm like, damn, this did not apply to me when I was 23, but it applies now. Like, I am struggling with this now. And so it's one of those things that has consistently been like, I hear you, we can work on this. I hear you, we can work on this. And I was able to speak to me in a very direct, demystifying way. And it was scary and it was hard, but it made it less, like debilitating to change XYZ about my life, to be happy, to feel good, to feel successful, to feel like I had control, to feel like I could do or be what I wanted to be. It was a little piece of empowerment in that sense because it was so demystifying.
Well, and so two things, because I want to keep going. I also think we should pause for a second because some people are like, okay, I've heard of the Enneagram. I'm getting the sense that it's a personality assessment, or maybe this is what I've known. Also, you're starting to say it's different from other ones. There are other ones. What do you mean? What about this? Is this the right? And now we're getting a lot of wheels spinning. And I think that pressure of, is this the one I'm supposed to use? How is it supposed to help me? What's going to come? And so we'll layer into that, how that the shame of figuring out who we are makes it even harder to want to figure out who we are, because it feels like, again, like another brick wall.
Yeah.
But let's first, can you break down for people what is the Enneagram? Just sort of the basic definition, but also what is it that, again, you kind of laid it out beautifully, but just to maybe reiterate it once they hear what the Enneagram is, what is it that the Enneagram can provide for somebody? Yeah. If it fits, if it's the right place for them, what has it unlocked? What do you see as the potential for people if they choose to use the Enneagram?
Yeah. So I will say off the top, I am very much an eat the fish, spit out the bones kind of bitch. So like, different strokes for different folks. If this part of it works for you, take it and spit out what doesn't resonate and so on and so forth. Do that with anything and everything. Find you, whatever means necessary. So the Enneagram is as a blanket statement, it is a personality typing tool that breaks people down into 9 main personality types. You can break it down way, way further and get very, very specific, but 9 main personality types that are not typed based on behavior or characteristics. While there are some key traits, those blur lines, it's based on core motivations, core fears, core longings, and desires. So the different things in us that don't change over time, they either get managed or mismanaged, not our behaviors. I am a lot more to myself than I was as a child and a teenager and a young adult in those early years. And so my behaviors have definitely changed, and I'm grateful I didn't use any of those to assess my Enneagram type. Now, on a bigger level, if I take the word personality out of it, don't get mad at me. If I like to use the word essence, and I know that sounds a lot more spiritual, and I use a very human psychology-based approach to the Enneagram and let people do what they want with it. That's totally fine. You have my permission to do whatever you want. But let me say your essence, as in, this is who you were made to be. This is who you truly are. And so it's essentially a road map with with the bumps on the side of the road and everything that tell you when you're veering, but it's a roadmap to your essence. It's essentially, it answers the big questions: who, what, why, how, when. And the things that it provides, God, can I say everything? When you find, like, I had said this in a podcast previously, the phrase like, why you do one thing is how you do one thing is how you do everything. Yeah. In this case, why you do one thing is why you do everything. And when you understand that big why, there's almost a place your mind can't not touch. Like when I have worked with clients who are like, okay, I am this personality type. I really need to work specifically on how it affects my spending. I am this personality type. I identify with the core fear more than you know, but it only really affects my eating habits. I have self-sabotaged every single relationship I'm in. Whatever is coming up for you, whatever quote unquote wall you're feeling into, or the internal question that's being asked, there's a good chance that your core fear or the core things that you're motivated by, sometimes even on a biological level, are starting to compete with you. And sometimes the things that we do out of that, the behaviors that we don't really measure your type by, they can be like symptoms. And so like, it's kind of like coming to a place where the first and biggest thing that you need to know is why. And once you have that, we have so many more answers, but we also have so many more questions. And the next question ends up being like, well, then how? Like, right? Like, why do I do this? Okay, well, then how do I do it differently? And the answers are all there and laid out. And so I think the blanket answer to what's available through the Enneagram is whatever change you are hoping to make within yourself sustainably can be made through the Enneagram when you're able to take an honest and decent look at your motives.
So it sounds like a couple of things that I wrote down as you were talking. So one, you see sort of a distinguishable point between this and other assessments, because many other assessments are externally focused. And so that could be behavior, but also perception. So a big one I think many people can resonate with is introverted versus extroverted, which is typically assessed and determined by other people based on how they perceive you. So I was always perceived as being an extrovert because I'm loud. I can take up space in a room. I do public speaking. I love to have conversations, do all these, whatever. Yeah. I am so far from extroverted. And part of that is people didn't quite understand the difference between what they actually mean and really the idea of where you derive your energy, where you, recharge, whatever. But again, sort of the focus on, well, if that's my personality type, either it's, well, introverted is bad, extroverted is good. So I have to change that. I have to figure out how to be more of this other one. So it's a lot of...
For what? For who?
Exactly. But sort of a societally driven, these ones are better or worse. And then also we're staying focused on external components versus internal elements. So what you're seeing is that the Enneagram really takes off some of those layers and says, okay, your behaviors are important. We're going to talk about that. Your connections, the way you engage with the world. Those are all interesting pieces of information. But in reality, those are signs and symptoms that we're going to assess in a different way. What we're looking at is who you are internally. What are those? The same thing that I do when I'm doing any sort of shame-based work is what's the shame, which is our fears? What are those biggest fears that we have that are motivating us? And also, what are our values? And often those two things exist in competition with each other, or one is sort of typically shame overarching over the other one, because that's still very motivated by whatever that fear is, the fear of disconnection, of not belonging. Yeah. So it sounds like for you, as people are going through this, they're starting to figure out what are those innermost parts about myself? And then also the other layer, if they're open to it, is where did I lose track of them, silence them, suppress them? Why? How did that serve me? How did it not serve me? Because as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, but some people, when we're thinking about essence, as someone who had a significant amount of childhood trauma, there's always that part of me that's like, well, what would be my essence if I didn't have trauma? So is my essence now like, is it trauma informed? How does the Enneagram take that into account? I have very real and wired fears, motives, values that are driven by some of those things. And so it really sounds like, and I'm going to pause after this because I know I'm like adding a lot that you're probably like, oh my gosh, you're giving me like 7 pathways and I want to go on them. But it sounds like really it's understanding the way that your full self, your brain, your body, your soul, your emotional being, how it has come together to figure out how to exist in the world, and then who you naturally are. And it's going to be informed by those things, those experiences, absolutely. But we're also going to get to take a look at the parts of us that have been lost because of those things as well, and maybe shrouded by shame, trauma, pain that's gone unresolved, and how to bring those parts back out too. Do I have that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will say this too. I think with, you talking about trauma, we had talked about, I think we talked about this privately, but like, don't do an online test, so on and so forth. And I'll give you an example. When I first took the Enneagram test, I took it online. I took it twice. The first time I typed as there are 3 centers of intelligence for all the personality types. Either you're like a head person, a heart person, or like a gut instinct person, right? Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't. I typed as the type 8, which is the challenger, which is a very gut body instinct person. And I was like, I could see myself doing these behaviors and maybe thinking this way sometimes, but it doesn't sound like me. I did it again. I started typing as the type 6, which is the loyalist or the guardian, which is in the head center. I was like, this doesn't feel right. And lo and behold, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So let me tell you that there's a lot of psychological, physiological, traumatic, different things that can get in the way. They never, ever, ever, ever get in the way of who you are, because who you are is always trying to scream its way out through the trauma response behaviors, through coping. Every who you are is trying to get out. And so I will say that like it took a while, but I learned my actual type based on like who the heck's in here before I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So that's why I don't really like the online tests, because there's nobody across the table to hear your language, the words that you're using, look at your body. There's no one there to ask you a question just in case. You know what I mean? I think a lot of some of the mistyping makes people feel like they're never going to be known. And that's just not true. You may never ever feel fully or completely understood. And please hear me when I say that that's a reflection of how much you've understood yourself, and that's okay. Like there's no wrong or right amount to understand yourself, but yeah, it can get a little dicey. You know.
Well, it sounds like two things. So one, you know, in your instance, as an example, you were coming out of these online assessments with a result that didn't really feel like it matched. And it wasn't like, I'm rejecting this because I don't like this one. This one doesn't fit. It's more,
it felt off.
Yeah. And so you could tell, but it also made sense because again, if we go back to behaviors, you could see these things. You probably had been doing that. You'd been reacting from some of these places before. Yeah. Once we connect that to, likely some of that is a response to or a reaction to your trauma, to a hyperactive vasovagal response or polyvagal activation, like all of these things that could be happening in your body. It would make sense that your gut sort of motivation, the head piece, because you don't trust the other parts in the same way, because it wasn't safe given some of the things you had experienced. And so it does sound like for some people that have maybe done this before, because I've had clients, severe trauma histories, they've done these typings. And I think they've all been online tests by themselves in isolation. And they'll come in and they'll tell me what their Enneagram type is. And if I'm being 100% honest, I do zero with that. I don't do anything with it. I've never read about it. I know I know this much about which for people listening, I'm showing maybe 2 millimeters about what the Enneagram actually is. And I think it's only so helpful because I also think for some people coming in, it's like someone that comes in and is like, I hate CBT, don't do CBT, or I only want you to do CBT. I'm not going to do anything with either pieces of those information because we're not going to make boxes before we've figured out where we're going. In most cases, the goal is to get rid of the boxes. And so for some people, I think they come in, they've done this because they probably have experienced major trauma, burnout, overwhelm, shame-based burnout specifically, which is, I think, that performance self getting in the way of the true self, the authentic self for so long. So then they're like, I just need to know who I am so I can figure out how to move forward. And this is giving me a quick fix and an answer. And it might not even be right for them, but they aren't even pausing long enough to feel, is it right? Is it not? But it's, well, this is who I am. And this is just how I have to figure out how to move forward. And we're going to do with this and do that. And so as you're saying this, I want to remind people, one, the tools also are really important, or the skills are really important when we think about when and how they're used in our journey of healing. And so there's lots of distress tolerance skills that I can give people. Even when they would come in for eating disorder recovery. I'm like, we can stop the behaviors in like a week. I know that sounds wishful, but we could do that. The problem isn't your behavior. Because if we stop doing that and we don't get at the other things, we're going to find it manifesting somewhere else. And so we need to do really slow graded, treatment
Roots
and recovery
and fruits kind of thing.
Exactly. And so with the Enneagram, it sounds to me like it's less, I do it one time, here's my type. And now everything revolves around that. Because again, our sense of self might be mixed up in shame, might be mixed up in trauma. And like you said, it's trying to come out, but for us to expect we're even going to know what that feels like when we see it or hear it right away might not be fair. And so using it as a tool that we come back to, using it as a tool for discovery. And also it sounds like what you're saying is ideally using it as a tool with somebody who knows what they're doing around it so that they can help you ask different questions, consider different things. Because at the end of the day, it's an assessment somebody else created. You're going to know yourself more than anyone else.
Absolutely.
So using it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll even say this too. Like my fiance does not know his Enneagram type. I know that sounds so weird. Like it's something that I tell people all the time. I'll get consultations and Susie will sit in the chair and go, I really need this. And then suddenly the next 25 minutes, I'm hearing about like her husband and I'm like, oh, hang on a sec, Suze. The Enneagram's for you. It's not for him. And people tend to get really confused. And I'm not saying it's not for your partner or it's not for men. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is it is first and foremost individual use only. Like there are some things that I could sit here and tell you and even tell your partner every single thing about their Enneagram type and they could do nothing with it. It is strictly an individual journey. So I know my personality type. I've known it for a long time. My fiance doesn't know his, but I don't need him to know his specifically to have a loving, healthy, accepting relationship with one another. I use it myself. Now he's told me, okay, I'm ready to do this. I wanted to do it on my own time and terms. I'm ready to do it. And I know that whatever type he ends up being, I'm not going to first be like, okay, like type 2 and type whatever he is together. Let's do this and have a perfect relationship. It doesn't work that way. What I'm going to eventually do is here's all the information. Here's all the tools. Find someone to work you through this because it is important to definitely work with it. In my opinion, like I will say that in my opinion, it is important to work with someone who understands the Enneagram if you want to do something with the Enneagram. And, I had a consultation recently where, I don't even know this person's personality type yet, but they were like, I have done XYZ in my life as a wife. I've done XYZ in my life as a mom. I've done XYZ in my life as a business owner, and I don't know how to balance all of it. After we end up having our personality typing session, she may have very, very different goals, but I'm going to have more insight on how to help her get herself, to her goals. That's the fun tool of the trade. I don't actually get people to their goals. They get themselves there.
Well, I love what you just said. And I was just sort of reflecting on, so one, you not being the person to type your partner because there's so many overlap pieces. There's so much bias that could get introduced. There's different interpretations and you don't want to take away his opportunity to let it be his thing to share with you. Yeah. And that's, I think, something that's very important. And for a lot of us, when we're doing work, like I love going to talk to my therapist because I want to then, when I choose to share it with the rest of the people in my everyday life, I want that to be mine, that I get to share how and when I want. And sometimes when we don't have that, I think that I will filter what I'm saying and how I'm exploring through my projection of what I'm thinking that they want from me and how to make it okay for them. So one, I think that's really cool that you just pointing that out too. I think the really interesting thing, so my next question was going to be, how do people, because you'd mentioned, if they want to use the Enneagram as a tool. And I think what I'm pulling out from this is the Enneagram is one language. One, you said you used to work in tech. I think about a friend of mine who does coding language. And so there's different types of coding language and it feels like a foreign language to me, but they spend years learning how to do that. And that language is how they communicate. And so the Enneagram is a tool for communication with the self and a tool that we can choose to use to communicate with other people. And it doesn't sound like here's the language to use for other people, but here's an opportunity, here's an invitation, here's a method for you to be able to know yourself more so that when you're sharing yourself with other people, you can share from a more authentic place. And so I guess the thing I was thinking about when you're saying, well, people are going to get themselves there is essentially the Enneagram is a tool for them to get to that question, who am I? What's my purpose? What's my goal? What do I want? How do I want to show up in the world? And then also really thinking about, how do I create space to be vulnerable? So those core fears, those core values, those core motivations, sharing those innermost parts of themselves, that's what unlocks authentic living, is the sharing of those things, not sharing all the amazing things and our successes and our wins, but really thinking about that other layer. And so all of this to say, I'm thinking about if somebody came in and they're like, okay, I'm ready. I want to do this typing work. A lot of the people that I work with are, I would say, high functioning, high performing individuals. They have likely been masking their own needs and wants. It sounds like similar to you and me. We got very good at taking care of everybody else for different reasons and suppressing our own wants, often probably out of a necessity or survival, depending on what their life was like growing up, relationships as they got older. So now there's this, I want to figure out who I am. And it's a lot of times it's stepping them back from action. So I need to set better boundaries. I need to be more assertive. I need to do this. And my initial questions are, well, that's great. I can tell you don't like being where you are right now. You want to just feel better, feel different. But if we don't actually get at why this is hard for you, why setting a boundary is painful, why you don't feel like you have a right to be heard in a room, we're never actually, like I could download all the BuzzFeed articles on the top 10 things you could do to change your boundaries at work today. I could give you a script for how to structure your time. Nothing's going to change. You're still going to feel lonely. You're going to feel like shit. You're going to feel constantly in a state of distress. And so for you, if somebody's coming in, is that the same sort of conversation just through a different lens? Like we need to help understand who we are and why how we're showing up in the world is how it is, so that you can then have the choice, kind of like you said with that quote of you know the information now. So now it's a choice if you don't want to change, but you know it. And that knowing then is what really unlocks the door for them to make the changes in their own lives.
Yeah, essentially, yes. One of the first and really like, you know, for example, when I give my fiance the information about whatever his type ends up being, it's going to be clinical and neutral, because who you are as a person is just neutral. It's like up to you to like love it and find. So that's like one of the first things that we do is we say, this is the like under this archetype, this is the personality structure in a very, very neutral way. In what ways does this apply to you? And what ways does this not apply to you? In what ways have you seen this show up? And we go through it piece by piece by piece. And there are a lot of, you know, I don't like to like from the jump, like overwhelm people. We go into subtypes like instinctual variance. If this person's a self-preservation person or a social or a sexual person, it's going to manifest differently. It's going to show up differently. Does this apply to you? Does this not apply to you? In what way? Oh, okay. So it only really applied to you from ages like 9 to 12, but like that was really impactful. Okay, let's table that for a second because we're going to have to talk about that. So it's a lot of seeing everything as neutral until you give it animation and you decide, I want to pick it up. I want to work on this piece. And so for me, with my personality type, one of the key traits of the type is often called seduction, but is really securing connection through charm. And that was one of the main things that I had to focus on for like the first, 3 years of looking at the Enneagram. And it took me a really, really long time. Now, for me, that was a staple of who I was as a person. And I knew desperately that I needed to undo that. But the first thing that I needed to do was see me as a person as neutral and see the why. Like, well, why do I, seduce, or why do I, secure connection through charm? Oh, because I feel like I'm inherently just not tolerable. Got it. There's something else that I need to do there. So it's like accepting statements as neutral and seeing if they apply to my life, but then starting to ask why till you cry and do all those other things. Because the truth of the matter is I could sit here and go, okay, you're a personality type 3. You're probably going to do X, Y, and Z with your money. You're probably going to do X, Y, and Z with your emotions. That's not fair. That's not accurate. That's not cool. That's like the Pinterest version of this shit. Like it doesn't work that way, but if you come to me and you're willing to say, I'm going to look at everything neutrally and put it in one of two baskets. It applies to others, maybe not to me, maybe not right now, or yep, this is one of those big things. This is part of my step 0. This is part of my, whatever. And so I think really just seeing everything as kind of neutral in the beginning is just so helpful in that way.
I love this. I know we're getting right to the end of our time, and obviously I could keep asking you a million questions. There's also, I think a few key things that I want to give people in that. So one, I think about in acceptance and commitment therapy, there's this idea of seeing the self as content versus seeing the self in context. And so one of the things that you work a lot on is the idea of when you just see the content. So for many people, that's the bullet point list. I'm only worthy good enough if blank. Here's what I can offer. Here's what I do. If I can't do these things, if I retire, if I'm no longer in this role, if I am not this size body, then what do I have? Because everything has become about content. And we compare ourselves based on content. This person is a size blank. I'm a size blank. This person is the CEO. Right. I've been in the field longer and I'm still at a mid-level position. Instead, a lot of work on shame resilience is building context around the lives that we live and around the content that we have. And it sounds like that's really what you want to empower people to do with the Enneagram is the information is just content. It's content to absorb, to take in. It is still going to be wrought with error because not every single person can be boiled down to one of, you said there's 9 types, right? Yeah. So there's not 9 types of people in the world. There are a billion types of people in the world.
Correct.
That tend to relate to different types of personalities or perform in different ways, or through the context of their life, we can start to make some sense and put some things together. And so really taking in information as neutral as we would. I'm thinking about something we would do back in like middle school. Like all I can see right now is a frog dissection, which is probably not exciting for people, but we all did it. And I wasn't dissecting this frog and then like thinking about, anything other than just I'm taking in this information. Mostly I'm taking in the smell. And so, but when we go back to this, it's just, we have put ourselves in a position that every time we take in information, it feels like it immediately gets filtered into, so what am I going to do about it? How does this work? And so then the information comes in and as all this must be true and now I have to fix it or I have to elevate this thing instead of just, I'm just going to learn about this. I'm going to learn about these different personality types. I'm not also just going to get fixated on this is the personality type that one quiz told me or one person told me. And now this is the only place I'm going to stand. I'm going to take all of this on, learn about these different pieces. And again, I think what you said is so important is the power of picking up what fits for us and putting down what doesn't. And really being okay with that. And there's a difference, I'm sure, that you see. There are probably people in the beginning you're working with them and there's a resistance to taking something on or owning something because of their shame, their fear, or even a lack of awareness at that point in time. That's different than maybe saying, no, this really truly doesn't fit for me. I'm not picking it up. But then being open to the fact, sometimes it sounds like I'm even just saying, I don't know. I don't know if I do this or if this fits for me, but I do know that I'm deserving and allowed to explore and see if this fits for me as I continue to do this work of knowing and growing and evolving.
Yeah, no, that's 100% it. One of the things I like to tell people at the top of typing sessions is I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you an x-ray and then I'm like, okay, here's what's there.
Right.
This is a collaborative effort. And so like one of the ways that I like to empower people who are doing these typing sessions is if they don't know if something applies, like I tell them, I'm like, ask me for examples, ask me how it shows up. Ask me how it's shown up in some of my other clients or friends. Ask me anything. Ask me anything to see if it fits for you, because there's a few things you can leave here thinking or feeling uncertain should not be one of them, right? Like uncertain about, because uncertainty around who you are or aren't or may not be or whatever, especially because it is a system. I mean, that's a breeding ground for shame, right? So you want to do everything that you can to say this fits, this doesn't, this fits right now, but it didn't yesterday. This may not fit, but I feel like it'll fit next week. Who knows? Who cares? You get to decide how you, you get to decide and choose how showing up as you actually looks and actually fits authentically. That's everybody's individual decision. I love what you had said. There are not 9 types of people. There are billions of types of people. That's 1000% true, and I think the journey of figuring out your Enneagram type is the beginning of that freedom, because like, oh my God, it's like, I don't want to be put in a box. No, the Enneagram shows you've been stuck in this box for whatever, how old are you now? However long you've been alive, you've been stuck in this box. There's a whole world outside this box to get you there. Like sometimes learning the system is the thing that goes, okay, I don't have to live like this anymore. I'm outside the box,
I love that. I think this is such a beautiful place to wrap. And that being said, I think some point in the future, we're going to have to do some form of a part 2, even maybe just kind of diving into our own exploration. Because I'm seeing myself in a lot of those things too, and recognizing, what we think about is like your 100% in a given day looks different. Sometimes it looks different in the morning than the evening, sometimes the day before, the day after. And also recognizing, again, going back to context, the context of who I am and how I show up. There's so many consistent points to who I am pre-trauma, during my trauma, post-trauma, also as a kid, I don't even know, an emerging adult. I feel like I'm just starting to enter adulthood at 36. And so really starting to think through the consistency of what I value, who I am, what I've feared, what I've spent most of my life trying to protect or run away from. There are consistencies and those things are there, and being open to recognizing. For many people, and they come in and they're like, I hate my job. I'm in a terrible relationship. I want to do that. I got to fix all these things. We go, well, this isn't the first time you've been there. This has probably been a problem your entire life because again, unmet needs, repressed values, wants, whatever that is. Okay. We've basically kicked up everybody's brain pond. They're spinning. They're thinking about all these things. They're still like, what do I do with this? Do I want that? But many people I know are going, okay, so if I were to take away, what's my one next step? What's the one thing I take with me? And then the follow-up question for many people is going to be, and how do I do that if I want to do that with Jackie?
Okay. So I'd say next step, if you are the kind of person who is just, I love curiosity. I want to learn. Go on Amazon, type an Eneagram book and pick a cover that you think speaks your language. I mean, I would say read the description that, read the description of the book to make sure it fits. Cause a lot of times, especially with personality things, people can take it in a lot of different directions. I like to read a lot of neutral stuff that isn't necessarily like spiritual or religious, just because I like to make it my own. There are lots of podcasts, lots of books, lots of neutral books. I think The Wisdom of the Enneagram was one of the first books that I had started with. It's a great book. I highly recommend that. If you want to work together, that would be so cute, so fun. First and foremost, I love DMs on Instagram. So if you want to just ask a question or just, hey, got a quickie, you can DM me on Instagram. My website is knowyourdamnself.com. You can go there to work with me. In February, I typically run a sale. It is $497 and it is 3 typing sessions. Essentially, it's one for you, one for your partner, and one of you guys together. So now I know I typically say that the Enneagram is just for you, but sometimes it's such a fun thing to do, to hear about somebody from their own language in a way that they're like, oh, I didn't know this language actually applied to me. So it's something fun that a lot of couples can do. I mean, how much can you go out and have like a prefix menu, right? Like, it's boring. Have popcorn at home and drink wine and hang with me. Other than that, I run typing sessions all the time. And for every typing session that I book, including the ones in February, I gift back an identical typing session to a single mom on my waitlist. And so if you also would like to join that waitlist, that's on my website as well.
I love this. This is incredible. And seriously, the fact that you can do these typing sessions with somebody who can actually walk through it with you. Many of you, we've been trained to think, save money at all costs and just keep, finding what's free online. I want you to just pause and ask yourself how that's working for you. And also, why do you not believe you're deserving of investing in yourself? So if it is working with Jackie that is like, oh my gosh, this actually sounds fitting for me, or she's resonating with me, or I really do want to go deeper on this, remind yourself you are allowed to do that. You deserve to take care of yourself in those things and to invest in yourself. And it sounds like she's totally open to helping support you. And if you can't make that work financially, or you're looking for other resources, I wrote down The Wisdom of the Enneagram. So that'll be in the show notes along with some other books and podcasts and things as well. So we'll make sure that's there. Jackie, this has been amazing. I love this. I think, again, just coming back to that point of, these are all tools and resources to help us figure out who we are and how we want to show up in the world, because we deserve to be seen. We deserve to live a full and complete life. And I think how you are trying to support other people, but also being open to the work you're still doing to support yourself is incredible. So thank you for bringing that onto this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. This was a joy. Like, this was such it itched a place in my brain that had an itch for a while. Like, honestly, thank you so much.
I love it. Well, listeners, make sure that you reach out to Jackie, let her know how you feel, submit your thoughts in the Q&A and in our poll that we have below this. Let us know, or send me a voice memo or an email if you want to see anything more from Jackie, have more questions about the Enneagram, or it's pulling up more questions for you about different topics you want us to cover. But for now, go enjoy the rest of your day. Take a deep breath. Remember, you are allowed, deserving, and have absolutely the right to be seen in full. And we will see you here next Sunday.